Over the recent weeks, I've been reading the Nolan Variations book by film author Tom Shone, and the interviews he conducted with the director gives us a lot of information on Christopher Nolan's beginnings, his filmmaking style, and overall process. In my last video, I discussed how Christopher Nolan built a fascination over being a director and his approach with the term structure. In this video, I'm going to be reflecting on the second chapter of the book and focusing more specifically on Nolan and film orientation, which includes how the blockbuster auteur applied his interests to his first few films. We learn a lot about his previous work, but we can also apply this to his latest film, Tenet. But before I get into it, if you want to see more updates and videos on the work of directors like Christopher Nolan, alongside further videos on the Nolan Variations book, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoy this video, remember to give it a like rating. But without further ado, let's dive into Christopher Nolan and film orientation. So we begin this new chapter in the Nolan Variations by transitioning from the previous video essay, which was based on the building of structure within Nolan's work. This stemmed from his personal life right the way through to his approach on film. But when it comes to the orientation of Nolan as a filmmaker, we see more reflections of this in his early life at the University College London. Nolan studied and was the president of the Film and TV Society here, and we learn in the Nolan Variations that the location that was used for their study was a tough one to arrive at, reflecting in a way the areas in his films. Whether it's Gotham being separated by destroyed bridges and cracked ice, trapdoors, layers of a dream, and of course the tunnels of the Batcave. However, the importance of this that we learn from Nolan is that this particular place was his workhorse. The director states that this film society allowed him to settle in quickly due to his heavy travelling and early life experiences. Nolan said, "I remember feeling like that was a lot easier for me at UCL than it was for some of the people I was around just because I'd been abroad. I'd been away from home for a long time, so it really wasn't that big of a deal." He was essentially able to move on and get stuck in with the work he wanted to focus on. Become the person you aspire to be and invent yourself is the words Nolan used. We also learn that he wasn't a bad student, but he spent most of his time at the college down in the basement of the Film and TV Society, learning firsthand how to operate cameras, how to edit using a Steinbeck, to cut film by hand, and sync sound. It's here that they would screen films and that the money collected from the screenings would then be used to finance short films by the Society's members. Among these members were Nolan's early composer David Julian, his wife Emma Thomas, Alex Hoare, Lucy Russell, and actor from Doodlebug, Following and Tenet, Jeremy Theobald. After meeting his wife at UCL, they ran the Film Society together, which is where they developed their shared love of celluloid, cutting on film and projecting 35mm. They virtually used this time wisely, spending 3 years in college making short films, running the Film Society, and raising money to make even more films. Here he learnt doing a bit of everything in a full-on practical approach, shaping his filmmaking orientation. He began developing his focus here after becoming fascinated by George Louis Borges and eventually John Borsten's The Hollywood Eye, a book which explored the various connections between movies and their audiences, whether visceral, vicarious, or voyeuristic. This included references to the distilled sensation of pure speed in 2001: A Space Odyssey, the purity of IMAX, and the editing of the shower sequence in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It was through the example of the Norman Bates cleanup in the film that Tom Shone describes Nolan's fascination with point of view. Hitchcock flipped the perspective of the audience 5 minutes after we see Bates kill the star of the movie, making us root for him to hide her body. Nolan used this as an influence later on in his work, of course, making us see psychologically through the eyes of the Joker and his troubled protagonists, changing our viewpoint in certain filmic situations. He says in the interview that everything you do as a filmmaker is about point of view, where you put the camera. It's the process I am going through as a filmmaker. When I am deciding how to shoot something on the day, whose point of view is it? It was at this point that Nolan would then come across Raymond Chandler, after noting his name in the credits of Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, finding the process of making the camera a character an interesting perspective. It was of course Nolan's first 3 features of Following, Memento and Insomnia, which would go on to be shot through the eyes of the characters, narratively, structurally and psychologically. Nolan found a connection to Chandler's life, which also reflected this detail about character point of view, stating, "I think most people, if you ask them, feel themselves to be outsiders in some way. When you have dual nationality, you're quite clearly in that position, so I can relate to Chandler in feeling stateless." It was looking in from the outside that gave Nolan an advantage as a filmmaker, with having a noirish point of view. He was interested in people and how the perspective of them could be challenged using the lens of the camera. Not just that, but also how the entire story could be shifted because of it. I think Tenet is a great example of this because we watch almost the entire narrative through the eyes of the protagonist, and like him, we are questioning the events and the unfolding situation. It creates an unparalleled tension, but also an intrigue towards the very questions that the film is proposing, whether that's about time, free will, or trust. During his UCL days, Nolan was able to develop the seed of focus early on in his practical work, and he essentially couldn't get it out of his mind. Then of course came Christopher Nolan's Following, a black and white noir thriller about identity theft with lies, feints, theft, doubt and betrayal. Made 6 years after Nolan left the University College London, but drawing on a lot of the resources, influences and equipment he had enjoyed while attending the university, Following shines a torchlight into the tangle of questions about identity that Nolan had wrestled with in his early teens, his travels between England and America, and whether he felt at home in either. Tom Shone notes in his book that the film seems designed to resolve 2 conflicting elements of Nolan's own creative persona. One is the writer, and in particular the young man, with the fledgling artistic instincts that stem within that character, and the second can be found in the dark-suited stranger named Cobb, who could be the embodiment of the kind of smooth, ruthless upper middle class embodiment, both in himself and others. I did talk about Nolan's time at Hailey-Bury in my previous video on the Nolan Variations, so if you want to gain a better understanding of that time period, then I would recommend watching that video before we get into this section. I will leave a link in the description to the Nolan becoming a director video, but let's return to what Nolan said. He says to Tom Shone that it's all these protagonists who, the more they feel they're exerting control, ultimately it's the deeper they're getting into a situation when they're completely out of control. The further you can take all that, the better the realization is. To me, what's interesting about the writer is he's a guilty innocent. He's doing something that's bad, but it's nothing compared to what is actually going on. And I think that's true of innocent people in a way. They can carry a lot of guilt. Guilt allows you to create a sense of mystery around a character. There's a motivation the audience doesn't fully understand, and then when you reveal it, like with Maul from Inception, you see the layers. Guilt is just a really powerful engine of drama. With the director also revealing that he was burgled in real life and that he would have a lot of thoughts about the privacy of people in society, it was these symbolic barriers that made it into his films. In particular, Following includes a burglary and a main character that follows strangers, wanting to know what they get up to and where they go. It primarily got Nolan thinking about what happens if someone starts violating the conventions. And of course, we've seen Nolan break down the conventions of big budget filmmaking and genres in his career. But the real burglary had inspired Nolan's short film Larceny, becoming the model for what would soon after be Following. And Following to Nolan was ultimately a test of what he could do with really no resources, just a camera and money for film stock. The technical compromises were built into the script. And speaking of the script, Nolan states that he had written it in chronological order, then rearranged the order of the scenes. It was only while editing the film that the structural ingenuity began to pay off. He explains his fascination here with reading the script to Pulp Fiction, saying that the era of chronological conservatism was brought to an end by that film. By the time Following came out, Nolan became aware that we rarely follow chronological order in our everyday lives. It's a process of expansion, a filling in of detail, and making connections, not based on chronology, but on the particulars of the story. What Nolan tried to do with Following was tell a story in 3 dimensions. Instead of just expanding in one direction, it expands in every direction as you're watching through it, out of order. In fact, Following's narrative structure provides perfect cover for a couple of twists in the final 20 minutes, both going off and triggering each other. The first distracting the audience for long enough to allow the second one to have an even greater impact. Nolan says that the narrative is like a trap closing, and it's very satisfying for the audience, the click of the lock. The genre of this orients the audience and takes them on the ride that plays with their expectations. You are going down a road and then you change direction. At the end of Following, with the writer now under lock and key for crimes he didn't commit, Cobb disappears back into the crowds from where he first emerged. Is anything he told us true? Is he even a burglar? As Tom Shone puts it, he could be the director himself, disappearing into the weave of his own creation. The whole film could be an allegory about how easily writers are seduced and betrayed by directors, or the internal fight that goes on in the heart of anyone who aspires to be both. Nolan wrote, produced, shot and edited the picture, bringing together all of the disparate and competing strands of his identity, which ultimately results with a film director. What connects all of these details together in the Nolan Variations is how his reversed narrative approach is linked to certain things the director does in his everyday life. If you remember, in my last video in the series, I referenced how Nolan would take a strange approach to things like with his first encounter with author Tom Shone, in which he was flipping through a menu backwards. This made Shone wonder if his approach was linked in any way to how the structure of Memento, and of course the structure and nature of his other films are. Well, in this next chapter, Shone details that Nolan used an example to explain this. He asked Shone to explain the difference between his left and right hand. Nolan said that you can't, adding that you can only do it by feeling the concept of the left and right, which is purely subjective. It's completely impossible to describe objectively. This is in a way linked to movies as a whole, which creates different subjective experiences, and with regards to Nolan, we have films that are purely structured to stimulate these different responses. It further shows us the approach of Nolan as a director, being one that is intrigued by opposing forces, and how that creates an interesting landscape. This was an experiment that was described greatly in the book by Shone, making us see more into how Nolan's mind works. He likes challenging perspective, and with Shone not being able to answer the question that Nolan laid out for him, he proves that you can only tell something the way you see it, but also leave it open to discussion. All of Nolan's films do this, and create perspectives that differ from one another because of their very nature. Tenet is structured like the very concept it tackles, Memento is structured like the very problem its character deals with, and so on. And this all stems from his fascination with people and seeing the different points of view. It's in the final stages of Shone's orientation chapter where he transitions into discussing how the director began to make a move into the pre-production of Memento and how that idea came about. This came after following his wife to America and trying to get on the North American Film Festival circuit. Rather than being discouraged by his rejection from film school, he started to grow an idea for a movie, the story of a man who loses his short-term memory and tries to solve the murder of his wife by tattooing clues onto his body. He emphasized that he wanted to tell the story backwards, saying that when you're around someone who does, you start to believe it. The greatest effect in all of filmmaking is the cut. The person who he is also referring to, of course, is his brother Jonathan Nolan, who was studying anterograde amnesia and was involved in an incident himself, which brought this idea into fruition. While in Madrid with his girlfriend, the couple got lost looking for their hostel and were picked up by 3 thugs, who followed them back and held them at knife point. They didn't take much, but Nolan's brother had spent the next few months obsessing over what he could have done to stop them. Then came the image of both of these points being combined, an image which was a character with anterograde amnesia situated in a motel room. Jonathan Nolan of course started writing this immediately, and soon after he proposed the idea to Chris on a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles, saying to him at the time that it's not like any other amnesia movie where the guy doesn't know anything. So in this case, with the structure and character, anything can be true. He knows who he was, but not who he has become. Nolan was so impressed by this idea, coupled with his own fascinations for the project, along with his interests on perspective and point of view, that he asked Jonathan if he could write a script based on his short story. Nolan said that he just remembers that the idea was perfect for a Lynchian film noir. That's how it struck me, film noir but with a subversive modern or postmodern spin. Following this, he immediately wanted to find a way to tell it in first person and put the audience in that character's point of view. It was of course after the success of Following, with awards and critical praise, that the question became, what was Nolan going to do next? At which point, Nolan would simply have the script for his next film Memento, and he would aim at selling it during the festivals he showed Following at. He says, in the back of my head, I was like, can you really do this? Can you really make a film backward? But they were the main details that Christopher Nolan and Tom Shone gave in their interview for the Nolan Variations second chapter. What we learned was how all the orientation and aspects that Nolan built a fascination over formed a link in building his approach within Following and eventually the brainstorming of Memento. His early life and interest in film was the catalyst for this, and it stimulated this idea of challenging an audience's point of view. Ultimately, Christopher Nolan's orientation was about challenging perspective, using the things he was interested in and became fascinated by. I personally learnt a lot just from reading this chapter, and it will be intriguing to see what Nolan says as we go further into this recent book. The second chapter acted as a perfect continuation of the first one, and now we are beginning to go into his production and process on all of his most famous pieces of work. I would totally recommend buying it if you are a fan of Nolan, and I will link it down below in the description if you want to buy a copy. But let me know down below what you think towards Christopher Nolan and his film orientation, alongside the comments he made in this interview. We continue to learn loads about him as a person, alongside being a high quality filmmaker, and I can't wait to read all of your thoughts on what was said. For more updates and content on the work of directors like Christopher Nolan, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating. I will be continuing this series on the Nolan Variations book with a video on each chapter, breaking down different elements of his career and filmmaking style, so look out for whenever I post or update you guys on this content. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.